Hello there, welcome. This is going to be something very new for me today. I'm going to try and do a tutorial about playing scales, major scales on this DG Melodeon. Now, before I go any further, I would like to point out that if you're not a Melodeon player, or if you don't want to be a Melodeon player, then this video is going to be very boring. So I suggest turning your video player to something else, maybe something about cats, or maybe another one of my videos, you never know. However, if you are a Melodeon player, then this video will probably still also be boring, but sometimes boring things are good for you, and I guess this is going to be perhaps one of those things, you never know. So yes, this will be a video focusing on the three most common major scales that are possible to be played on the right hand side of a DG Melodeon. So that's not surprisingly D and G and also A as well. I'm going to be using, say, this instrument or others like it. I'll probably switch about, which are fairly standard models certainly here in the UK. This one's a 21 button DG, and we've got 8 basses on this side, although we won't worry too much about those here. And if you've got a different instrument, maybe one with more rows or a different configuration, maybe the video will still be of help. If you've got one in another key, then it should still be useful, but you'll have to sort of mentally transpose, watch what's going on here and not what the sound is coming out. Anyhow, that's enough of a preamble. Let's get on with the first bit. Right, okay, so we're ready to start. You might as well start at the beginning and try the simplest and most straightforward scales that I know, really. And I suspect if you're already playing Melodeon, you're going to already know this too, but it's still worth mentioning. So what we're going to try and do is first of all start out on the inner row and play a basic G major scale, 1 octave in the lower register. On this instrument, this one's got a third button start, so I'm going to find my root on the third button here. That's the G, and I'm going to do something like this. So a push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, another pull, and so on. I think you probably already know how to do that, and obviously you can go back down the scale as well. And the more you practice it, the faster and more efficient you get. I think you probably know that also. However, there's more to think about with this. For instance, maybe you have trouble memorizing the button names, what note you're playing, which button does what. Melodians are kind of hard to learn in that respect, so using a scale is one way of memorizing it. So instead of just pressing the buttons and saying push and pull, perhaps it's worth actually saying the note as you play them, so as you remember. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and back to G again. So that's one good reason for doing scales, so you can actually remember what it is that you're playing, what the notes are called. Another way of doing it is that, as you've seen, the notes there are very push and pull in nature with the bellows, and if you're doing lots of pushing and pulling, then using the air button, this one over here, will help you a lot in smoothing that out and making it easier to do. So instead of leaving it fully closed there and it's very jerky, if you push it halfway down or something like that, you'll have to experiment, you can get it sounding much smoother. So that's another reason to experiment with scales, to learn that. A third reason, timing. It's good to have your notes all steady in time, in rhythm with what you're playing. and scales are a good way of practicing that. So instead of speeding up on the easy bits and slowing down on the hard bits, what you want to aim for is to get everything in time and nice and smooth. So perhaps a metronome or a bit of foot tapping will help you there. Another use for scales. Another use again is to practice getting the notes sounding as you'd want them. Make them all the same if you like. So if you can get them the same length and the same volume, that's a good start. Perhaps you want to go staccato and make them all quicker. Or you might want to play more legato, or you might want to start quietly and then build up to a lot of noise. Anyway, that's enough of that one, except that everything I've just spoken about with this G row here, and you probably know this as well, you can do this on the D row. So starting on the third button there, you're going to get a D major scale. Right, okay, so that was the G and D scales in the lower register. So I guess it's a good time to try the same thing in the upper register. Now, first things first, you might notice that this instrument is different, and the reason I've switched to this one is because this one's got a lower reed in the treble side, which means that this end of things isn't going to be quite as squeaky. So that's a good tip if you have one of these available and you're going to be using this end of the keyboard. Also as well, notice that this instrument has got an extra set of buttons. There's 23 on here rather than the 21 I had on the other one. So this one starts with its root note on the fourth button there. So a G scale like we did before starts here now. And something else I didn't mention earlier was the fact that when I played that before, I was using 4 fingers on 4 buttons. And the reason I mention that now is because in the upper octave you can't do that. You need to use 5 buttons, and well, we could use a thumb there, but we don't tend to do that. So we're instead going to have to move our hand a little bit at some point to make this work. So I will show you how to do this in G on the upper octave. So we'll start off with the index finger on the G. That's the one. And then the next note, well, in the lower octave we just pulled the same button, but we can't do that here because that's, we know that, we just played that in the scale earlier. Instead we need to go to the next button along with our third finger. So it's going to be G, it's then going to be A, and then it's going to be a B, but we could use this finger, but it's going to be better to do our switch, our moving our hand thing here. So we could do index finger on the G, middle one on the A, index finger on the B, and then we can just keep going with our hand in place there. We're up to the D there, then the E, F sharp is right on the end button there, and then finally the G is actually 1 button back. It's a bit odd, but there we go. And then we need to switch again, and then we're back to the G. There we go, I messed that up, didn't I? Let's try again. And you'll notice as well, the 6th and 7th notes, they both are on the pull, just like they were in the bottom octave, so it feels very similar there. And that's how you do it. Except there's another way and this way might in some cases be better, and I'll make that clearer in a later section. Instead of just swapping once when we did that at the beginning, we can do that twice. So we could actually do it this way. We start on the index finger again, there, then do the same thing, pull, then switch, then go to third finger on this one like before, but now switch again to back to the index finger, and now, so that way we're not using the little finger there, we're using the others. Which one you choose depends on what you prefer really, but that's another way of doing it, and that still works, and it's fine. What you shouldn't do, and this applies for other things as well, go back to the beginning, is just don't move your fingers, because then you run out. You're on your little fingers on there, but you still need another one, and doing something like this where you just move it, that's bad practice. You don't, that's really bad. Don't do that, don't do that. So yeah, that's how the upper octave works, and the same pattern works on the outside row for the D scale. A little slip there. One other thing you might notice, if you've got a fourth button start and you've got a shorter keyboard on it, that you're missing the end two notes. Now with the D scale that doesn't matter because you don't use that one anyway, but with the G one you'll run out of notes. What you'll get is where are we? Where are we? There we are. And then you won't have this one and you'll be stuck. But you don't have to be completely stuck, because on the push on the other row you do have the missing note. There we go. So that's a little tip as well. So yep, that's playing in the top octave. Okay, right then, we've just done 1 octave scales in G and D in the lower register and also in the upper register. So it stands to reason that you should now be able to play a 2 octave scale, starting in the lower one and going right up to the top of the upper one. And well, you probably can, but there's a little bit of a issue with that. There's something that I've not mentioned yet, and which is probably going to hold you back. So I'll go through what that is now. So when we did the G major scale before, we just used our 4 fingers on 4 buttons, and we started on the root and we did, and that was fine. Now if we want to go to the next octave though, to carry on, we've got a problem, because finishing up on that one we had our little finger on the D, but that's not where we started the next octave when we did it before. And when you're on your little finger, the options for going further up are sort of limited really. It's hard to contort your hand around, and it's certainly not okay, as I said before, just to move your hand like that, pressing the little finger down. That's really bad. So we need to find another way of doing it. So there's a sort of a fairly okay way you could do it, which is quite simple to show you first, and that is go up the scale as we did before with exactly the same fingers, but when we get to this one, instead of just pressing it with your little finger, is switch and press it with your index finger, and then you're ready from there to carry on going exactly. However, there's another way, a better way. What you can be doing is doing this switching thing earlier on, so you never get to use your index finger on there and you're just in the right place naturally. The way I just showed you to do it's okay, but you've got a bit of a big jump and they can lead to errors and things like that. You don't really want to do that, so this is a better way to go about it, I think. So start again, index finger on the root, But now do your switch here. So instead of playing your middle finger again, use your index finger. And then do the same. So middle finger, and then index finger there. And then switch again. And then your index fingers in the place where you need to go to carry on with the upper octave. And that's how to do it. And of course you can do that on both rows, so you can do a D major one as well. And you'll notice then that in the top octave I did the version where I switched twice. You don't have to do that, but because you're doing all the switching in the lower one now, then in the upper octave, then it makes sense to keep on doing it. So that's why I showed you that one earlier on. Okay then, right, so we've done G and D scales in the lower octave, the upper octave or register, and we've done 2 octave scales. However, all of this so far has been very much pushing and pulling in nature. So what happens if we want to play G and D major scales in a more smooth way, in a way that isn't pushing and pulling? Well, we can do that to a point. It does depend on your instrument how well you can do it, but we can certainly have a go. This is a different instrument again. It's DG on the main 2 rows. It's the 3rd button start like the first one was, so we got G on that one this time. And but there's some extra buttons here and some extra buttons there, and make a little bit of use of that in a second. However, so you want to play a G major smooth scale. Now if you want to play smoothly, the scales tend to work much better when you're just pulling rather than pushing. So we'll go with that for now. And so to make a G scale that's going to be pulling, well, we don't want to start here because that's pushing, so we need to find a G that's on the pull. So there is one on the other row, just about, not there, there. And so that's where we're going to start. We're going to play that G, and now we're going to look for a on the pull, and if you learnt your notes correctly, you'll know that's on the inside row. Then we need a B on the pull, which is on the outside one. And then it's G major, so it needs a C natural, so that's on the inside one. So that's, so far, that's nice and simple. It's just rocking backwards and forwards between the rows. However, the next note, well, that's a D, and well, there's a D on both rows, but both of them are push notes. So that's a bit of a problem because we wanted to play nice and smoothly. Now, what do we do about that? Well, if you've got an instrument with extra notes in, or maybe one where you've actually flipped the notes over, maybe you can actually do a D pull as well. So, like that. However, if you don't have one of those, well, you're going to have to push it just for this note. So the way to do that then is, now you can do it either row, but I think it's probably easier in this case on the inner one, and use your middle finger. Okay, and then we can finish off pulling the rest of it. Now I suggest doing a switch here and use this index finger on the same button to get an E, and then an F sharp we need, so that's just next door on the same row. And then finally we want a G pull in the upper octave, so that happens to be on the outside row about there. So we can go. So that's pretty smooth apart from the D. If you've got the D, then you're sorted, because you can do it all on the pull, but you need an instrument which is a bit different from the usual to be able to do that. So that's one of the reasons some people have in a row like that, to be able to do that. Anyway, right, and then D. You can do a D, a smooth D on the pull as well for the most part, but again we have a problem because, like with the G, major scale which had a D problem note. Well, D major still got the D problem note, and it's going to depend on your instrument of whether you can do anything about it. Now this one does have a D pull right at the bottom and the D pull at the top like I mentioned before, so that means on this instrument I can actually do a whole D scale on the pull. Oh, he says not doing it. Like that. However, you might not have a low D or an upper D on the pull at all, and so you're going to have to push them again. So you're going to have to find a D to start with, and maybe the one on the outside row is easier for this one because you're going to be staying on there for the next note. So there we go, a third finger's a good one for this. So we do a push D, a pull E, then the F sharp on the inside, then G, A, B, C sharp, and then you can finish on that note as well if you like. And you can do the upper octave as well if you feel like it. So yeah, you can do smooth D and G scales if you like, using the pull and going across the rows. Right, okay, so we've done D and G chords in the lower register, the upper register, in both for a 2-octave scale, and we've done some smooth playing as well on both scales. You might think that's as far as it goes, but there's one more thing I can show you with a G scale anyway, and that is trying to play a G scale using mainly the outer row. You may wonder why you'd want to do that, because surely that's confusing, and it is, but there is a reason, and I'll tell you in a minute. First of all, I'll show you how it works. So we start off and we'll play a G on the outside row on the pull. That's not a G, that is. There we go. And then we do an A on the push, a B on the pull. Now G major needs a C natural, and there's only a C natural on the inside one, so we're going to have to go across for that one. Next we need a D, so we go back on the outside one. And then we need an E, a push F sharp, and a pull G to finish. So that's... I've just played the D on the inside one as an alternative there. That's another option, and it's probably more comfortable, so perhaps it's worth having a go at that too. So and you may wonder why we'd ever want to do that. Well, it's because maybe you want to play some different chords at the same time. If you're pulling rather than pushing, the chords available are going to be different, and you might want that. So you might, for instance, start off playing the first G with an E minor. You can't do that normally if you're going the other way, so that's a nice reason to... Something like that. Different effect, gives it a bit more interest, doesn't it? Right then, so far everything I've shown you in this video has been about playing scales in the scale of D major or G major. However, there's one more main major scale that is commonly used on a DG melodeon, and that is A major. You might not play in the key of A major all the time, or if ever, but even if you don't, when you're playing in D major, you still often need to use A major fingering, so it's one to learn as well. So how does this work? Well, unfortunately with a DG instrument, almost by default it doesn't have an A major row, so you can't just do what we did on the other scales. We need to do something else. We need to pick out the notes we need from both rows wherever they're available. Also though, we have to be mindful of what's available on this side, so the notes we pick work well with both sides. So for A, we can start off thinking, well, where's A? Well, there's an A on the outside row there, which is a push, and there's an A on the inside row. Where are we? There, which is a pull. So which one do we use? Well, it depends on circumstances, but by and large it's better to use the inside one, because on the bass side you've only got an A on the pull. So it's best to try and make them match up really if you're going to do a scale, certainly on the root note. So we'll start there, start with the index finger on the A note. Now next, well, it depends on whether you want to be pushing and pulling or playing more smoothly. I personally tend to end up, when I'm doing A major, doing more of a smooth style, so I'll show you that one for now. And so the next note is going to be B, and if we want to keep it smooth then we want to keep that on the pull as well, so that's on the outside one, just about there. So we can go, and the next note is a C sharp, and there's only one C sharp we've got available to us. There's not one on the inside row, so we're going to have to be on the outside row, and that one is also a pull, so that means we've got a nice little 3-note pull scale very easily, starting here. Easy, huh? Next, it's our friend the D note, and as we found out in the last section, the D note isn't available on the pull unless you've got an extra button over here somewhere. So yes, we could go, but you might not have a note like that, so you're going to have to play a D on the push again, and you can choose whether it's going to be on the inside or the outside, and I think for the fingering it makes it a bit easier on the inside on this one. So you can move your index finger across there, and that gets you ready for the next part, which is an E, so that's on the same button on the inside on the pull, and then an F sharp again on the pull on the inside next door, and then we've got our G pull on the outside row. We did that in the last section as well, but that sounds funny, doesn't it? Because it shouldn't be a G. This is A major, and A major has got a G sharp, not a G. So you think, well, where's the G sharp on my instrument? I don't know. And yeah, an interesting question, because it could be, well, it could be on a special extra row, which is what it is here, like that. There it is on this one. Or it could be on one of the buttons on the very end. This one doesn't have those, and if it is, it might be a push or it might be a pull, depending on how you've done it, and it might actually be in the right octave for you, or it might be in the wrong octave. Again, it depends on your own instrument. Or you might find that you've got low notes down here and low notes there, and you haven't got a G sharp anywhere, so you're a bit stumped on that. So what do you do instead? Well, you could just leave it out and just practice the bits that you've got, or you could do what I did just now and actually play a G instead, a G natural rather than a G sharp, and that's not totally wrong either, because that stops the scale being a major scale in the normal sense but makes it into a Melodeon scale, and that's actually something that you find quite a lot in folk tunes anyway, so that's worth doing. So depends on what you've got really. You can use your G sharps if you have them, or you can play a Melodeon scale, or even if you've got the G sharps, it's worth playing with the Melodeon one anyway. So I'll do that and then finish it off and do the final A. So where are we? And then the final one is here, an A on the pull on the inside, or the Melodeon version if you like. And that's okay too. That's definitely one to learn. And a bit of a variation on the end there, but I'd say that I did that on purpose, but that would be a lie. I messed up. Anyhow, yeah, that's one way of going about A. Depending on your instrument, you might find you have a lower A octave as well that you can play. But exactly how that works is going to depend on how your own instrument is set up, so you'll have to explore that one on your own. But yeah, A is definitely a good thing to learn. So that's G, D and A. That should get you going for a little while. I hope you've enjoyed this. It's my first go at doing a scales tutorial, and it's only 3 scales there. There's plenty of other options to do further ones if you're interested. Perhaps if you leave a comment or like it or something, I might know to do another one at some point, perhaps about minor scales or church modes or arpeggios. Arpeggios are very good to learn as well. So yeah, thanks for watching. Cheers for now.